getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Well, I'm lumped up, but I'm okay. It's gonna get lumped up anyway. You better call back the posse. Just getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi.
All right, everybody. This is another episode of the RockerMike and Rob Presents show. I'm RockerMike. We got Rob Rossi to my left there on the screen. We have special guest today, Joe Yanosik. Joe wrote a book about a band called the Plastic People of the Universe. Right. You got it there, and I got it here. Okay. Great book. We'll talk about this book. This band is very obscure. It's a little bit of a different kind of show for us today with this. I think a lot of people may not, in America, may not have heard of this band, but it's very important, I feel, that we talk about it, basically because what they represent and how they got started and what they were influenced by. The main question right now, I'd say, is who is the Plastic People of the Universe? And how would you describe them, Joe? You are the expert on this band.
Well, they are a band that formed in Czechoslovakia in 1968. And this was a time when there was a lot of freedom in the country after many years of control over the people.
Right.
And it was what they called the Prague Spring. And that spring, there was a lot of freedom. And the Russian government, Russia controlled Czechoslovakia at the time, but they didn't like Brezhnev didn't like what was going on over there in Czechoslovakia, and he put a new person in charge of the Communist Party, and they really tightened the control over the people. They didn't let them travel anymore. They controlled the radio. So it wasn't as a result of the and then what happened is they called it the Warsaw Pact invasion. So 100,000 tanks and troops, Russian troops, came in and clamped down on Czechoslovakia.
Right.
And it wasn't really a result of that. But at the time, there was a young 17-year-old kid named Milan Hlavsa, and he was into rock and roll like a lot of Eastern European teens were. And he decided to start a band. And so it just was coincidental that he started the band a few months after the invasion. But at the time when the invasion happened, the Russian government, they were really more concerned with tightening and control of the media and putting the Iron Curtain up, basically, and they didn't worry about the teenagers playing rock and roll. Right. So they'd get around to that eventually, but for the first year they were more concerned with the higher level stuff.
Let me just interrupt you for 1 second. Let's kind of paint a little picture here for the audience. 1964, the Beatles, all that. Okay. I think that in the West here, we kind of think it really just affected us. Okay. But going East, it had an effect as well into some of these communist countries that you wouldn't think had really any knowledge of what was going on because they were behind the Iron Curtain. But the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and bands like that were really being heard in these countries, including Czechoslovakia, right?
Exactly. Beatlemania was popular the whole world, and everybody, all teenagers wanted to start a band when that happened, and he was one of them. And he got his school friend who played guitar, and he couldn't play guitar himself, Mela. His nickname was Mela, so he figured out I'll play a bass. Mm-hmm. And then they hired a couple other guys, and they started playing in local clubs. And then there was another band called the Primitives Group, and they were a psychedelic band. They had this guy named Ivan Giraud, and Giraud, he was really like the mastermind of the band of the Primitives, because him and his sister and his friend and his wife, the four of them had like this artistic direction team, and they used to put on like a multimedia show while the band was playing, just like Andy Warhol used to do with the Velvet Underground.
I was gonna say that the Plastic People of the Universe had two major influences, one being the Velvet Underground,
Yep,
New York band, and the other one being Frank Zappa. Right, Rob.
exactly.
And they got their name from the song "Plastic People" by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention.
That's right. Yep.
Right.
They didn't know what the song meant, like a satirical attack on plastic people. They just liked that. They just thought, hey, that's a cool name. It sounds good. And then the funny story was that, like, soon after that, there was UFOs were spotted over Prague.
Really?
And they said, oh, we'll call ourselves the Plastic People of the Universe. So that's where they got the name.
They were that I didn't know about the UFOs. That's interesting.
Yeah, so they just thought it was
that's why
a
they
cool
refer
name.
to them to the PPU.
Yeah, so people call them PPU. And but this guy Giraud, when the Primitives broke up, he saw the Plastic People trying to do the same type of music. So he took the guitar player from the Primitives and brought it over to the Plastic People. And then they had a really good band, and they had this great artistic director. And they and at that time, 1970, let's say, the communist government really started to crack down on the young people as well, and the rock and roll.
Right.
And they started a thing called normalization, where they tried to normalize the culture back to like what it was back when Stalin, was in charge.
Yeah.
So believe it or not, all of the bands had to perform a requalification test, and they had to play their music in front of a like a jury,
like a panel.
Yeah. And
Wow.
if the people heard like English lyrics, or they saw long hair, or music that wasn't what they liked, they said, no, you're not going to get a license, and they couldn't play. And that's what happened to the Plastic People. So they had to play underground, and they started to just play at like private shows, concerts in the woods and stuff.
Right.
And it was really underground, and they would get arrested, they would get thrown in jail and beaten up, by the cops. And this was, later on it got worse and worse, but pretty much throughout the whole 70s and into the middle of the 80s, they were persecuted by the government. And finally in 1986, 87, they broke up, and Halafsa formed a new band. He called it Pulnuts, which means midnight in Czechoslovakia. And they were a more guitar-based band, younger people. And he had some of the Plastic People veterans with him, but he had also younger people. And they were also a really great band. But I would say, most of the people in America and even around the world that know about the Plastic People, they know about their story. Their story is famous because they got arrested in 1976 and thrown in jail, and then support grew around the band. And one of the guys supporting them was the playwright Václav Havel, and Havel ended up writing essays about them. And later on, they got out of jail, and then the only place they could play was like Havel's Country Cottage, and they would play concerts at Havel's house with the police surrounding the perimeter of the house, of the yard. And finally, 1989 was the Velvet Revolution, they called it, where Havel was elected president. And it's just a great story how he wrote something called Charter 77. He was one of the people who drafted it, and this was a human rights manifesto that got support for the Plastic People, and it got support around the world. And that really caused a crack in the wall, and it caused the Russian government to fall in Czechoslovakia in 1989. So most of the people who know about the Plastics, they know that story, that the Plastics were like indirectly responsible for the revolution in Czechoslovakia, or they know maybe one album. But
I remember in '89 hearing about them probably for the first time.
Okay. Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't know about them before that. Because I guess just for some reason never heard of them.
Yeah.
But because I'm a big Lou Reed fan.
Okay.
Okay. I knew about how the band was very influenced by the Velvet Underground. And just coincidentally, today, March 2nd, is Lou Reed's birthday. I'm wearing my Lou shirt on.
All right.
And he would have been 81 today had he.
81, huh?
Yeah,
Wow.
it's been 10 years already. He's dead.
Wow.
2013. Wow. Yeah.
Really
So, being a big Lou Reed fan, and actually in '89, Lou had a big resurgence in his music because of the New York album.
Yep.
All right, that was very successful, and he was touring it. And word kind of got out about this, president that was, appointed in the Czech Republic, elected. I shouldn't say appointed; he was freely elected, and was a big Velvet Underground fan, and they were calling it the Velvet Revolution. And I was like, what? I'm like, how'd they even ever hear of the Velvet Underground in communist Czechoslovakia in 1968? But like we were saying earlier, it had its ways of getting in.
Yeah.
They probably had more fans in Czechoslovakia than they did in New York.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is nuts, but it's true.
Yeah. Václav Havel was always a rock and roll fan. Yeah. And, he loved the music of the Plastic People. He loved Velvet Underground, White Light, White Heat, I think was his favorite. And he loved Zappa, Hot Rats, and everything.
Yeah.
Zappa was the first one to go over to, Zappa was actually in Russia, I think, working for like Financial News Network, doing an episode about economic trade or something. And he was in Russia. And then the Velvet Revolution happened. And Zappa called up Havel's government, said, I'd like to stop by and meet you. And so Zappa met him, and that was a big thing. All the fans were there to greet Zappa at the airport. And there's really cool video of that you can see on YouTube. But then Lou Reed heard about it, and he said, I want to meet Havel too, because Lou Reed always considered himself a great writer, and he was.
He was.
He admired Havel just as a playwright who became president. He just thought it was a very great story. And then he gets over there, he meets Havel, and Havel, just tells him this incredible story, how, him and the Plastic People, they were in jail, and they used to read Lou Reed's lyrics, for inspiration behind the bars,
Wow.
And, and then Havel took Lou Reed to a concert that night, and it was Pullmats. It was the reformed Plastic People playing, and Lou Reed joined them on stage for a few songs. And it was a really historic moment. And they became lifelong friends for the rest of their lives, Havel and Lou Reed. And Lou Reed was a big fan of the Plastic People.
Yeah.
And I always tell everybody, if you're a Lou Reed fan or if you're a Frank Zappa fan, you need to know the story of the Plastic People, because
it's intertwined.
It's intertwined. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
go ahead, Rob. I'm sorry.
I was going to ask a question. Like, how did they release that first album? How did it distribute the album? The people in
Good question.
Get to listen to the songs. How will you get the album of the PPU?
They recorded it. It's a great story. They recorded it in a abandoned castle in the wintertime, in the basement of this castle. It was freezing, and they had to wear gloves on their hands and play their instruments, and it was illegal for them to make that music, but they recorded it. And then maybe a year later, tapes were smuggled out of the country, and they made their way to England, where there was a Czech expat living there, and he was always supporting the band. And him and a Canadian guy named Paul Wilson, who got kicked out of he was living in the country at the time. He was working as a teacher, and then Yvon Giraud hired him basically to help the Plastic People learn how to sing songs in English, just because he spoke English, and he became the lead singer of the band for a couple of years. But then when the Plastics were arrested, Paul Wilson was kicked out of the country. He went to England, and he hooked up with this guy named Yvonne Hartel, and those two guys put out the first album, which was called Egon Bondi's Happy Hearts Club Band.
So basically, in a nutshell, is that the tapes of the master tapes of these recordings had to be done secretly, and then secretly smuggled out of the country.
Yeah,
which had to be hard to do just that. Okay, yeah. And then make its way to a free country like England and put on vinyl or CD, or at that point whatever it was.
Yeah, it was vinyl at that time, and
vinyl.
Yeah, I first heard that album. The album came out. It was recorded in 73, 74. or 1974, didn't come out till like late 78 in England and France only. And I got a copy of it. It was an import, but I bought a copy of it in the mid 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And ever since I heard it, I just flipped. Because the album came with the album, but also a big booklet telling the story, of the Czech underground.
Right.
And it mentioned, obviously the Plastic People. And I just thought it was, an incredible story how this band went to jail for playing rock and roll. And the music.
In your book, Joe, I think it's one of the first pages. You have a paragraph in here where you say the plastic people of the universe are one of the truest examples of artistic perseverance in the face of tyranny, and also a perfect example of art imitating life.
Wow.
And I think that's very, very true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
This band, carried the torch of rock music when their lives were in danger, even looking rock and roll. If they had long, didn't they have to wear? One of the guys wore a wig to hide his short hair, and
right. Well, that was right at the beginning, right, where they were allowed to wear long hair. So one guy had short hair, he put on a wig.
Oh,
but years later, when the Russians were doing the normalization, they tried to get their license to play legally. So
right.
they tucked their hair behind their collars, but they didn't like the music that they were playing. So they said, no, you're not going to get the license. But right. I mean, what other band really can say that they were responsible for the revolution of a country and they went to jail for playing rock and roll? They're a unique example. And I wrote a good letter to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I said, these guys should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame because they embody rock and roll, spirit, as much as any other band. And they're not as well known, but they should be.
You get an answer?
Not yet.
I don't think you will.
I'm not keeping my fingers.
Yeah, I wouldn't hold my breath on that one. But
Right.
but I mean, they're more concerned with popular stuff, and
Yeah.
I have no use for that museum. But if they got in, that would definitely give it some good street cred.
Yeah.
Being in there.
Yeah.
You wrote the first real mainstream kind of article about the band in 1996. It was the first real in-depth profile of the band. I don't know how to ask it. Did you by 96 you already were a fan? Okay, you had the records and all that stuff. What made you at that time decide to write this article that got even more people interested?
I don't know. I visited Czechoslovakia for the first time in 1992.
Oh,
and
Wow.
So that was only 3 years after the Velvet Revolution. So a friend and I went there, and you could still see the communist influence, and the fact that we were drinking beers in clubs that a couple of years ago were like communist headquarters, and they turned them into clubs. So it was an exciting time to go there. But then I got back, and when I went there, I brought back a couple Plastic People and Pull Knots CDs that I had found there, and made some acquaintances. People were sending me tapes, and I just started listening to more about them. And then a friend of mine has a online music magazine, and he'd been asking me for years to write about, to contribute something to his web page, because he knows I'm a big music nut like he is. And he said, come on, write something for me. So I said, okay, it's got to be something I'm passionate about. And I said, it's got to be the Plastic People. So finally in 1996, I put that article out. And then, as I said, when I was at that point, I thought the story was over. But what was incredible about it was in 1997, Havel, he was still president. This was the 20th anniversary of Charter 77, which was the big human rights manifesto that was responsible for the Velvet Revolution. So that was in 1977. This was 20 years later. Havel asked the Plastic People to reunite. They had broken up, in 88. And he asked them to reunite just to play one show at a 20th anniversary Charter 77 party,
right.
At the castle where he was the president. And the Plastics got back together. They played the one show, and it was such a hit, and they loved playing again with each other, that they decided to tour Eastern Europe in '97, and then they loved that so much they kept on going. So it turned out to be a full reunion. And in 2001, Halafsa died, the leader of the band.
Yeah.
But then the band continued on, and really they were going, playing continuously till I would say 2015, 2016. And then they broke into two factions. They have like half of the guys are still using the name.
I was gonna ask you about that. What was the reason for that fracture, the split to be two different bands?
I would just answer that by saying it was about time. A band playing together for 50 years, it was about time that they would break up for whatever reason. But two of the guys kept the name, and two other guys hired some younger people, and they called it PPU New Generation. And then they were playing separately
with younger guys in the band.
Younger guys, more
now,
hard rock.
While they were on tour, after they reformed, they made their way to New York City, and July 18th, 1998, they played Irving Plaza.
Right.
I did not make that show. I do kind of remember it. I was planning to go, couldn't make it.
Yeah, that was the first time they ever played in the U.S. under the name, Plastic People.
Plastic People. Yeah. And then shortly after that, a few months later, in the fall, September, Havel had a state visit to the Clinton White House, and he made a very unique kind of request to have Lou Reed play the White House.
Yeah, that's I guess the policy is that whenever a head of state is invited to the White House, they get to pick the musical guest.
Now, story goes, I've heard it from different people, is like the administration was worried about Lou.
Right. This was during the Monica Lewinsky
Lewinsky scandal, and there you're bringing in Lou Reed with certain topics of his music.
Mr. Walk on the Wild Side.
Yeah,
they didn't think it was a good time for that. But so the Clinton administration initially they said no, we'd like you to pick somebody else. And Havel put his foot down. He said no. He said it'll be an insult to me and to the Czech people if we don't have Mr. Lou Reed. And so Lou Reed went with Havel. And what did Lou do? Lou brought the Plastic People guy, Milan Halafsa.
Yeah.
So, I have pictures of Halafsa with Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton. And Lou
they're
Reed
in your book, right? I believe they're in your book.
They're in the book.
Yeah.
So it was a great moment,
Do you know what songs he did? I'm just curious.
They did Dirty Boulevard and Sweet Jane, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not too controversial.
No.
Yeah, those are good songs.
Yeah. That's cool. All right. So did they play with Frank Zappa anymore?
Well, Zappa, as I said, he visited them in 1990. And then at the time, they had broken up, the Plastic People, and they were going under the name Pull Knots. So Zappa did meet Pull Knots, and he, jammed with them a little bit when he was over there in 1990. And again, they just became friends when the Soviet troops officially left. They withdrew from the country, which was probably in the early 90s, a couple of years after the revolution. Zappa was invited back again to play a concert, and he met them again. So they maintained a great relationship. But those are their two influences. And if you listen to their music, which I hope everybody does, it's a great story. But the point of my book was to really give more, to tell the story, which is amazing, but also to tell people focus on the music too, because you never heard music like this. It's a combination of Zappa, Velvet Underground. You got free jazz in there, electronica. It's really, and it's all done with very primitive instruments. It's guitar, a cheap keyboard, theremin, homemade theremin,
clarinet.
Nothing sounds like it,
Yeah. That's cool. That's very cool. Just thinking, like, if somebody wanted to get into the music, like, if you were watching our podcast and say, hey, I want to, get it, where should you start? Because, in your book, you kind of have almost like a discography. You talk about each album, and there's a lot of live albums too. Where's a good place to start?
Well, the one place to look now, I would say, there's a label in Czech Republic called Gorilla Records, and it's spelled Guerilla.
That kind of, like military guerrilla.
Like military. So it's guerrilla, like underground.
Yeah.
And it's a one-man operation. The guy's name is Labus, but he's been putting out the music from the Czech underground for 20 years now, I think. And he recently got the rights to do all the 6 main Plastic People albums. So those are available from him. But also, I would say look on eBay. The one label that reissued most of their stuff back in the mid to late 90s was called Globus Records. Globus is not around anymore, but they were a great Czech label.
I remember that label.
Released, I think, an 11 CD set with the complete recordings of the Plastic People. So I would say look on eBay and also Discogs.com, a great site to get used CDs. And if you're a Plastic People fan and you buy my book, email me and I'll send you some stuff, because I like to spread the word.
Yeah, definitely. And since you mentioned it, where's a good place to reach you? What's your email? So we'll put that on the links and stuff with the show, but you could tell everybody if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I self-published this book. I didn't have a lot of funding for it or anything. I just did it myself, and I paid to get it put together, and I printed like 500 books. And originally I did like 250, and then I did another 250 after the first group sold out. But I'm down to like 30 books now, and I'll order some more once these are gone. But sales are consistent, and I've been selling it around the world. So it's pretty exciting how I've found fans of the Plastic People all around the world. I don't know if everybody's interested in the music or the story or both, or if they're Lou Reed fans or Frank Zappa fans, but anybody could be interested in this book because it covers so much. But if you email me at jyanosik@oponline.net, I can give you the link, or I can give you the link, Mike, and you can put it on there. But I do have a web page for the book, so it's got all the ordering information there, and it's also available on eBay.
Okay, we'll definitely put
send
the
me
links
that
up.
link so I can put it up.
Definitely, they'll be part of the podcast.
Cool.
Definitely. So, Joe, I want to thank you for coming on. You're fantastic. Great story. I hope everybody. Yeah, I hope everybody really, digs deep with this band a little bit. You should at least check out the music, but respect the story. I mean, this band went through hell just to play rock music, and like no other. Let's put it that way. I mean, there's been persecution of rock stars, but not like this.
Yeah,
if you like the Velvet Underground, you'll like their music too.
Yeah, and also just to mention quick is another band they were influenced by was the Fugs. Another New York underground band of the 60s.
Wow.
Yeah, another great influence. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Fugs.
Yeah. It's amazing to me that stuff was making its way all the way past the Iron Curtain into Czechoslovakia.
Right.
But it doesn't, and it's human nature. I mean, stuff like that is, good art, good music. Exactly. It's going to find its way, Yep.
I think that's perfectly said.
I wanted to ask one more question. So was the verdict ever overturned for them after being convicted? Was it ever overturned by the courts or anything?
I don't believe it was, no. I mean, as far as I know, they never got like a formal pardon or anything. I know that Yvon Giraud did. And then I think like he got it like a couple months before he died. So he never got like even money back that he was owed. But the Plastics themselves, I don't know if they got a formal apology.
Yeah. If they haven't, they should. And they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, too. Anybody listening that could make that happen.
Yep.
So, all right, Joe Yanosik, thank you very much.
Right,
appreciate you coming on.
Good talking.
And we will send you the links as soon as everything's available. And send me the link for your information. We'll put it all with the podcast. Everybody can check it out. All right.
I'll send it to you. Great.
All right. Thank you very much. Have a good night now.
Okay. Have a good night.
Have a good one.
I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. I'm getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Well, I'm lumped up, but I'm okay. It's gonna get lumped up anyway. You better call back your posse. Just getting lumped up with RockerMike and Rob Rossi. Getting lumped up with RockerMike.